From a service bay where the fluorescent lights flicker like bad decisions, it's Fixed Ops Focus with Dave Rogers and Steve Shaw. Dave, the guy who can upsell an oil change like it's fine dining, and Steve, the technician who still believes in miracles, torque wrenches, and second chances.
You got any good stories today?
Yes. I had a couple of them recently. I don't know if I'd want to share them now. They were kind of ridiculous, but it's really
Well, I'll tell you a funny story.
some of the
'Cause here's
crap
what
that
happened to me
happened.
today.
But
Today
some of the
today
crap,
is January 1, right? All right, well, it's the first day of the year, business day of the year.
right?
And, we always talk about accountability, right? Accountability is something that, if we're going to do objectives, somebody's got to hold people accountable, so on. And as an outside service trainer, I have zero authority for anything other than my job is to show up and teach. Well, I know for a fact that there are quite a few people, and I'm not going to name any names, but there are quite a few people that would prefer not to train, right? They would, even in our own university system, there are people that would prefer not to train. Well, nothing pisses me off more than when somebody has to have, let's call it a collective decision on how to train, right? And so the collective decision is going to be always, we don't want to train. And the decision is going to be 12's not good, 1's not good, 9 a.m.'s not good, and 3 o'clock's not good, right? They're going to tell you there's never a good time to train, right? Other than if you're a very progressive group like yourself or some of our university, clients, it's always a good time. I mean, we were talking, we're slow right now. So when should you train is in the rough times, right? When there's no cars or whatever. So I'm talking to a guy today and he's been a long-term client I'm not gonna name him. I said, "Hey, here's the invoice for next year. Uh, looking forward to a pretty good 2026." And he says, I'm going to have to talk to my team and see if they still want to do this anymore. And I can tell you what the answer is. We don't like doing it, right? Now, I can tell you what the answer is if I said, "Hey, I'm going to be at your store tomorrow." We don't have time, right? So the answer is always, we don't have time to do it. And so that's my rant today. I know you have your rant is a little better than mine, but my rant is, look, if you're going to train, you're going to take shit, right? I know when you call your people out to join us for a seminar, nobody runs up and says, "Dave, thank goodness you had this class because I've been just looking forward to this for the last 6 months," right? So if you go out and surveyed all 40 of your managers, how many of them would come back and go, "Dave, we love online training and we want to keep doing it. And in fact, how about having more classes for us," right? Uh-oh, I lost you. No voice. You're on mute again. What happened? There you go.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I said we got one guy at 100% in the whole group. That guy, there's not enough training for him because he's at 100%. But everyone else, no, they'd say the same thing. You're right. Yeah.
That's my rant. It's like, I'm not the most favorite. I know people like me, you know what I mean? When I come in and we always have a good time, but whether it's the good times, the bad times, whether it's December, January, the first day of the month or last day of the month, everybody would rather be doing something. And so you know what I did? I looked it up today. I decided I'm going to look up training statistics. And I've kind of known these numbers, but I thought I'm going to look up with my buddy Grok and ask Grok. The Fortune 500 companies, people with more than 1,000 employees, they average over 60 hours of training per person per day. Regular
No,
companies,
per
what's
year.
that?
Per year.
Per year,
Yeah,
excuse me, per
okay.
year. Yes,
Right.
per year. So 60 hours, 1 week, a week and a half every year, they're spending time learning, training, developing. A tier 2 company, less than 1,000 employees, let's just say, 40 hours, which is down from 47 hours per year. So in 2025, training went down, 7 hours per man. Car dealers, 8 hours per year is what we train our people. And we talk, why is our customer experience not so good? Or why are we doing all these things, objectives or this or that? Well, we're doing 8 hours of training each year. It's mind blowing. It's absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, when I was a service manager for years, it was, and we didn't, I mean, we didn't have obviously the online Zoom and all that stuff, right? But it used to be, I used to want to have all my people in school or some kind of training for 40 hours a year. That's what I used to
Right.
say, 1 week. I
Yeah.
didn't know. I came up just like everyone else, but I just always thought it sounded good, right? Give them a week, 2 weeks vacation, 1 week's of training. I figured that was a fair number. Um, but yeah, I would believe those numbers. I think Croc's probably very accurate there. And you got to consider there's some groups out there like the big boys and the the publics, and there's some progressive groups out there that probably do a really good job. So the average dealer, it might be 8, but a lot of your neighbors are probably 4 or 2. That's hey, listen, we had the conversation today at one of the stores. We were talking about this particular store, you won't hear me say this a lot, but we'll talk about it. The hours per hour, 1.3 hours per hour last month, right? And the question came up was, is that exclude express or is it include express? And the service manager said, well, when I took express out, it was still 1.3. So we're like, well, then you're obviously not, there's something not going on. And the same guy is the guy that does believe in the training. He's the one that talks about having 100% of the online university and everything else. So we had the conversation. Why aren't you taking people off the front desk then and putting them in a room and giving them 5 classes to train how to sell? Because every day they're up there, they're costing you what? An hour per RO? 8 tenths an RO? I mean, you got nothing to lose. Take them off the line, And because the guy next to him could get 1.3 as well. So you might as well put somebody in a room and train them, right? And
Right.
but that conversation came up today, and those are pitiful numbers, and it's I think they took their eye off the ball last month. It was the holidays, and I think everybody was too busy celebrating. And how do you go from 2.2 or 2.2 hours in a row to 1.3 inside of a month? Just ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, I do think that we have to spend a lot more time training. I think I've think that since we started with the advisor training in 2019, 2018, whatever year it was, it's made a huge difference in you know do they do it all the time? No, but it's made a huge difference in the knowledge, giving them a little bit more courage, giving them the word tracks to use, and I just think our customer pay numbers are up accordingly all these years, and every year, even with lower RO counts, we're still hitting the numbers. So, um, and I think it's all training.
Well,
I
yeah.
really do.
Well, even I mean, certainly I have a vested interest in it because I'm Steve Shaw of Steve Shaw Training, right?
Right.
But you don't have to use Steve Shaw, and you don't have to use any of the other players in the space. I think that managers are capable of doing it if that's what if they want. But think about this: if I was selling a car and I burned through what do they call it? If I was burning through opportunities or
You're
ups,
ups.
as someone
Yeah.
might call it, you would not allow. If I waited on 10 people and only sold one car, somebody would have a talking to, correct?
Right. Absolutely.
There's probably an expectation of however you meet 10 guests, you should sell X, Y, and Z cars. I couldn't give you those statistics. But if I'm a service advisor, there should be an expectation that of a similar type of hours per RO, or we need to have a conversation. And that goes back to what you were talking about in previous. There should be a standard, uh, an expectation, and or a benchmark of some sort that we follow.
I've been a big proponent of these service lane tools. I'm not a, I mean, I like tech. I'm not, I'm an old guy, but I'm not a dinosaur. I like technology, but I don't like technology just for technology, right? And I've said it before, if you have a good process in place, multi-point inspection, let's just say, your guys do them, the technicians do them correctly, they're presented to customers, it's a manual system. Um, the beauty of electronics and technology is you now have reporting that will tell you how good you are, how bad you are. Whereas in the past, we would have to sit there and go through repair orders or go through the stack of multi-points and see what kind of percentage of penetration we had. So I love the electronic multi-point. I like the reports it gives you. And it's one of those things where I think, when it comes to training and stuff, you get the results based on, what kind of process you have. So, if you're not getting the sales, like you said, if the guy's brooming through ups or he's just running through it, and you look at these metrics and the service tools and you see, that service advisor, only 60% of the repair orders are getting a multi-point, right? Or you see his closing ratio is 13%. You're right. Why would you let that person talk to any more customers today? It just, you wouldn't do it in sales. Hint, hint, GMs, you wouldn't do it in sales. You wouldn't do it. If you had an F&I guy that was doing 500 a copy and everyone else is doing 1,300, you probably wouldn't let that guy get, the good deals, right?
Right, exactly.
So if you have
That's so
training,
funny.
what?
I was say it goes back to the baseball strategy, and I never knew any of this stuff. I'm like such an astute, studying the St. Louis Cardinals right now, and talking about where do they place all the batters? Who's a leadoff hitter, who's second, who's third, who's batting cleanup? Why do they put everybody? It's things you don't necessarily, you might know, but you don't really think about. And a guy that can steal a lot probably needs to be in front of a guy who doesn't strike out a lot. You know what I mean? And you
Right.
don't think about that.
Absolutely.
But see, you got to think about your strategy on these things. What am I charging? What are my expectations? What is the overall strategy? How are we going to do things? And then have that benchmark and have that, that accountability piece. And I find that fascinating right now, of the strategy and the accountability. I must have too much time on my hands. I'm not sure.
It's about time you got into sports. That's all I got to say. So there's a lot of synergy between all businesses, but the car business, I use football analogies. I love football, and I use that analogy all the time. And I'll use it now as for your service advisors, which is what we're talking about. That's like your offensive line on your football team, and if you're the service manager, you're the quarterback, right? And your technicians, your skill positions, so your receivers and running backs. So if you don't have a good offensive line, if you don't have the 5 guys in front of you blocking, doing a good job, you get the snap, you get a half step back, you're sacked, right? You can't even hand the ball off, or you can't pass the ball because your offensive line sucks so bad, right? Being a New York Giants fan, we suffer with that all for years, but it all starts with that. Your technicians aren't going to be able to, your skill positions won't be able to do anything without that line blocking for you. And I've been using that analogy for years, and there's so much synergy between sports and our business. It's amazing. I love that you've gotten into baseball. So now I got to kind of twist it into your baseball words or learn from
The only
you
thing
now.
I've ever cared about in life is the St. Louis Cardinals.
That's
And
great.
because I grew up in St. Louis, and there's nothing better than going a trip to the ballpark.
Sure.
Even living in LA, going to a Dodger game was nothing like going to a game in St. Louis. So I'm fascinated by it. I can't get enough of off-season trades and so on. I think you and I talked one time. Wouldn't it be cool if you could trade? You could trade, like, I need a master tech here, I need a lube guy here. Could we have a conversation and trade some folks? That'd be awesome.
When I was with the public company, and they used to track our employee turnover, and they grade you on it. If your turnover was too high, you got a beating every year. And I used to ask HR, I said, why can't we just have 1 month that's a free agency period? We could cut, we could transfer, we could get rid of people, and it doesn't count against us. It doesn't go against the salary cap at all. They never buy into it. But
Hey, I have solved the salary cap in baseball, because they're going to shut down in 2027, because I have solved the salary cap situation. And you just you said it, right? There's a salary cap, and there's one exception, right? You get the salary cap, but you can still get your super duper guy. Now that could go on for one whole collective bargaining agreement, 10 years? And then at the end of the 10 years, you eliminate it. We're done. Baseball's on. We never have to lose, right? I'm telling you, that's the solution to the
Well, they
salary
get the
cap.
luxury tax in baseball. So if you
They
go
have the
over the limit now, you have to pay extra money, which doesn't, the big dollar teams, LA, New York, they don't care. But
They don't care.
yeah, they don't care. Football just figures out a way to twist it up a little bit and reload it and stuff. The way the capologists, as they call them in football, they're the genius. They're the geniuses. Yeah, they figure out how to redo contracts and spread them out over 5 years. So yeah, it's we don't do that. We don't do that in the car business, right? You're only as good as your last month, and you're not on a contract, right? So.
And there is no salary cap, because if there's a master technician out there, somebody's going to pay him whatever it takes.
You're absolutely right.
Guy.
You're absolutely right. The only time there's a
Just raise
salary
the
cap
rate.
is when sales sucks and they're looking to slash in the back. That's when you just have a salary cap.
I'm the salary cap. Oh, times are tough. Let's cut out training. We don't need Steve
Yeah.
for the next how many times, right? But I
Yep.
think that's really the time where you should double down, right? Bad times. We should double down on training
I agree.
and stop worrying about what that costs. But how do we bring this all back and wrap up this session? How do we bring this all back for a good GM tip or new service manager tip?
Well, I think at the GM tip, I think we touched on it, but I think you do have to sit down and get into the weeds with your advisors and look at, and technicians. We talked about it already on a couple episodes. Look what they're turning, look at the hours they're turning, look at the gross they're doing. Look at some of the metrics. I mean, but don't just take it out of a NCM book or take it out of a NADA book. Look at your store, look at the average of the store, see what the other advisors are doing, and then try to take the lower performing guys and bring them up, just like you would in sales, just like you would do in F&I. And I think as a general manager, I think you have to look at that. I think you don't have to be a stranger to service and parts. And I think if you get in the weeds and you let people know how much you really do care about them, I think you're gonna have a team that'll run through a brick wall for you in the long run. Is what you're gonna get.
Absolutely. Right on. Right on. If I had to say something to a new manager, that's probably what I would say. That's I guess my rant is what I would say is, don't worry about hiring Steve or paying all the money for Steve, but you got promoted to that position for some reason. And so, look at those numbers and train your people, spend that time with those, especially those new people, right? They may have been a bartender yesterday. And so spend that time, share your knowledge. That's what you got promoted for. So take that extra time and take that person off the drive who's burning ups as they say, and, guide them in your best way. So I think that's a good way to end it here, for a quick one here at the beginning of the year.
Yep. Thanks for showing up. Taking some of your time away from baseball stats and spend a little time with us. That's nice.
Right on. I'll catch you later.
Yep.
Fixed Ops Focus is brought to you by Common Sense. Like, subscribe, and share on all platforms. Side effects may include advisors missing easy upsells, ROs walking out the door, CSI scores tanking, techs chasing comebacks instead of billable hours, your competition stealing your customers, and that special guilt of watching your gross profit bleed out monthly. Results may vary. Consult your Fixed Ops director before ignoring this advice.